Welcome to the July 2021 presentation with November Zulu 6 Juliet. That's Rob out of Truckee, California, and also out of Marin. And I'll run the slides to just say next screen when you're ready. And all yours, Rob. Welcome.
Okay, thanks a lot, Barry. I appreciate the opportunity. The whole issue here is to try and grow the AREDN infrastructure across California in the short term, and Nevada, and eventually across the United States and the world. But we have to start with small starts. AREDN grew out of the high-speed multimedia development that went on probably from about 2015 onwards. People using old Linksys routers, flashing them with new firmware to make them do different things, to build out mesh networks. And I don't know whether any of you were involved in the early stages. How's the audio, Barry?
Yeah, it's good. And mention you're fine. Mention the early stages. Was that HMSS?
HSMM. Yep. High speed multimedia, I think was what it was called. And it was all, as I said, all developed out of taking basic drugstore, not drugstore, op shop routers that you could pick up for 10 for $1 or something, and flashing those. So it's developed into this more sophisticated system called AREDN. And AREDN is a whole series of hams around the country and around the world who have developed flash firmware for a lot of standard off-the-shelf equipment. Next slide, please.
Get the slide going here. Here we go.
Here we go. So what is this mesh? It's an ad hoc connection of microwave radios, and it's totally ad hoc in the sense that you don't have to get permission. The mesh just grows organically. So you stand up a node and it connects into the mesh. It's either good or bad. Oh, Barry, wake up. Big yawn. So it grows organically. You connect and see if you can connect. You stick up a node, and if you've got access to anyone, you're on the mesh. It's self-healing, so if any part of the node goes down, there are usually redundant paths where you can get around a network problem. And we're working on several different ham frequencies: 900 megs, 2.4, 3.4 gigs, and 5.8. And these ham frequencies are adjacent to the unlicensed ISM bands that are used for Part 15 microwave communication. If you look at the technologies we've got out here for digital today, we've got VHF packet and now WinLink at 1200 boards, AFSK, suitable for text and in some cases compressed images, although it's a bit of a struggle. On HF, it's even worse. You can really only go to 300 baud. It's really only suitable for text. The AREDN mesh potentially can run between 1 and 30 megabits. Up here at the moment, I checked yesterday, I'm at, I think, 16 megabits here in Truckee. And so we can transmit text, still and video images, large data files. We can do voice over IP. We can do anything that we can do on the internet. Next slide, Barry, please. So anyone with a ham license can connect. It's just like all the rest of our Part 97 operation. So you've got a license, you don't need to do anything other than just have ID somewhere in your SSID. So we take off the shelf Part 15 networking stuff, Ubiquiti, TP-Link, MikroTik, are some of the manufacturers that are out there. The AREDN network grew out of HSMM, as I've already said. It's an IP network, but it's built by hams for hams, and we can add to it or restore it ourselves. We can restore a dead link in minutes if we want to, or if we're doing deployments for public service, we can stand up a link just for an event and then take it down at the end. So if you can hear anybody on the mesh, you can connect to them. Now, you may not necessarily get a great connection. You may end up with fairly slow data rates, but the cool thing about it is if you can hear them, you're in, just like ham radio. Because the network uses plain old IP, it's got a lot of capabilities that are there in the internet today, but this is not the internet. Next slide, Barry.
Before we do, on this top one, it says repurposes off the shelf part 15 for part 97. Either now or later, will you talk about that?
Of course, yes, I will. So the various bands that we can operate in, the 5.8 gig band is where I've done everything I'm doing. The 5.8 gig band has a lot of channels, and channels 170 through 184 are shared with WISPs. And WISPs, if you don't know what they are, I'm sure a lot of you do, the wireless internet service providers. So wireless internet service providers under Part 15 operate in the frequencies below channel 169. And just recently, there was a determination by the FCC that allows them to also use the ham band, what we thought was exclusive to us in the ham bands. So while the slide says non-shared channels, that's history. And in effect, this is reflecting what's going on. The wireless internet service providers are struggling to fit all their traffic into the 5.8 gig band, and they've been straying into the ham bands for years anyway. So just like we have on all of our other frequencies, we have to use it or we'll lose it. So I'm on a mission to make sure we populate these bands with as much activity as possible. There's a couple of channels on 2.4 gig. There was a little bit of activity on 2.4 gig because it goes further, and B, a lot of people have already got equipment. But there's really only two non-shared channels, and I think we've lost the exclusive access to them as well. And the problem with 2.4 gig is it's incredibly noisy. You've got microwave ovens, you've got people's Wi-Fi and all kinds of stuff. So 2.4 gig is not really recommended. There has been a lot of activity on 3.4 gigs. And as most of you know, we're about to lose 3.4 gigs. I think we're grandfathered in for maybe another couple of years, but it's going to serve the cellular industry. And again, this is a case of use it or lose it. I think we're losing it because we haven't been using it, and a lot of hams are very upset about it. But you know, it's our ability to use these channels which will make sure that we don't lose them, and because we make a case to access to those frequencies. Next slide, Barry. Let's talk first of all about what the AREDN mesh is not. It's not your father's internet. So you cannot do any commercial activity. It's not the internet. It's Part 97, so you have the same third-party rules as for all other ham radio operations. Cannot be connected to the internet. A lot of people think, well, we can use AREDN to get into a field day site to sort of pipe the internet down into our field day site. Sure, you can do that using Part 15 unlicensed microwave, but you cannot use Part 97. You cannot use the AREDN network under Part 97. The mesh is not international. It's not even national yet. And what we have at the moment is a number of mesh islands. And those islands, the most complex one is actually in Los Angeles. And the guy who originally started off the mesh is down there, and he has a very sophisticated system running around the Los Angeles area. So in summary, this is not the internet. It's an alternative to the internet designed for and used by hams. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, stay on that slide. Sorry. So Tom, who I'm sure you know, WA9 ETO, and I did some testing about a month ago. And here we are out on Mount Rose testing a link back to Geiger grade, so about 13 kilometers back to Geiger grade. We purloined a highway road sign and stuck a node on it and a battery, and then drove over to Mount Rose and tested back to it. And the mesh software allows you to do testing end to end without actually being physically in place at each location. So what you see in front of Tom there is a 5.8 gig node. It's a 200 millimeter dish. It's a Ubiquiti power beam, and it's been flashed with the software. And we'll talk more about that later. Next slide, Barry. So what do you need to connect? So you need a ham license, obviously. You need a direct line of sight path to the node, and I mean direct. It has to be direct. It has to be clear of any obstructions at all. As an example, I was doing some testing just before I left the Bay Area, and there's a tree in the way, and there was just one little leafy branch. It was pretty burnt off because of the drought, but I had to move my antenna slightly just to get away from that tree. It's not. We're at 5.8 gigs, so it's completely different parameters from what we expect at 2 meters. There are a number of applications out there that will allow you to test your paths before you use them. I use the link.ui, which is from Ubiquiti. There's a Canadian gentleman who runs a thing called Radio Mobile, which is really cool. There's also an application which is named rather ridiculously, Hey, What's That? And Hey, What's That is really intended for people to see what mountain they're looking at when they come to a turn out on the freeway or something like that. There are several different microwave radios out there. Ubiquiti I've mentioned. Microtech, which is a Latvian company, I think, or European company anyway, who makes some very nice networking stuff. TP-Link is Asian of some flavor. I can't remember which country. And the entry level here is with the $50 TP-Link that you can buy from Amazon. Barry, did you have a question, or do you want me to slow down or speed up?
Just mention on the right-hand side here, this is what the little TP-Link looks like, and that's what you're using.
That's one of the. I've got one here. Is my camera on?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing myself. Are you seeing me?
Yes.
I can't see me. But anyway, this is a TP-Link node. Are you seeing it? Is it coming up on the camera?
Yeah.
Yep. That's a TP-Link node. So what you have to do is you have to flash the firmware from AREDN from their website, and it's specific to the radio. This process is more or less difficult depending on what you buy. The TP-Link is very easy, so, and the Microtech is harder. So anyone starting off, I would suggest you start with TP-Link because the flashing process is very straightforward. But anyone who knows their way around a computer can do it. When I first did a Microtech, it took me about 3 hours to get it in. So it is not flat-hearted. And you see down in the bottom right, the flashing process is you have a computer obviously connected to the net, download the firmware from have a dumb switch there to help the IP addresses sort themselves out. And then between the switch and the node on the right, you can see there's a tiny little thing there that you can barely read. That's power over Ethernet. So the node is powered through the Ethernet connection. And a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with power over Ethernet, but it's the way all of this microwave equipment operates. So you basically squirt 24 volts in through that little dongle at the bottom, and that goes into a couple of spare pairs on the Ethernet cable and powers up the node. The radios that we're talking about here typically are integrated with the antennas, and there are other radios that have separate antennas and nodes. So this is a sector node from Ubiquiti. I wish I could see myself. How do I see myself? View. This time oh, it's because you're the speaker. That's why I can't see me. Yeah. So oh well. Anyway, do you see that? Do you see that node?
Yeah.
Barry?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, this is quite a substantial device. It's got very good mounting hardware. This is a sector node. I think this is a 120-degree sector node, and it's connected by SMA connectors to the radio, which is a Ubiquiti rocket. So this is a very standard environment, and it's quite rugged. You can stick it up in the bad weather. It's got water ingress protection here on the coax cables and so on. So you need a computer, obviously, with an RJ45 Ethernet port or an adapter. Most of our laptops these days don't have Ethernet, so you have to use an adapter, which of course you always lose. The other thing that just recently I'm able to do it using my iPhone or my iPad. There's a adapter you can buy on Amazon that goes from Lightning to RJ45, and that works great as well. And it's fabulous when you're outside. You can actually read an iPad or an iPhone when you can't read your computer, and it's usually doing the testing outside, you've either got to have a photographer's black sheet to hide under, or an umbrella, or you've got to try and use your iPhone. So just to reiterate, it's an open network. Anyone you can see, you can connect to. Next slide, Barry. So the first thing you have to do is to flash your microwave radio. Second thing, position your radio's antenna where you might expect to find a mesh node. Log into the radio and perform what's called a Wi-Fi scan, which may seem counterintuitive, but don't get too hung up on this because we're sharing the same frequencies as Wi-Fi. So that's why it's called a Wi-Fi scan. And often when you do a Wi-Fi scan, instead of finding AREDN nodes, you'll find other people's 5.8 gig Wi-Fi access points, which is a good way to know that you're actually your system's working, even if you can't find anybody to connect to. Look for nodes that have the AREDN SSIDs. So we find a node that is an AREDN node, you'll get an orange picture on the mesh on the display, and mesh status and mesh status. Barry, can you run your mouse over the right hand side there? Have you got your, yeah, so move down on the left hand column. Yes, thanks. So what you see there is a whole bunch of links, and these are all active links. And when you're on the mesh, this is your gateway to the mesh. So all of those things down there include stuff like cameras, mesh chat, the IP phone server. Oops, we're jumping ahead here.
I was trying to scroll in, but I lost it.
What happened, Barry?
I tried to scroll in, but it didn't work.
That's all right. Yeah, thanks, Barry. Appreciate it. So what you're seeing here is your gateway to the mesh. And as you scroll down, this is usually about probably 4 or 5 pages long. And the nodes are listed there by their accessibility, a metric called ETX, which I won't go into. But the lower your ETX number, the more chance you have of getting a good connection. So it's an IP network, and when you're going to any of those nodes, you're basically using either the IP address specifically. Barry, can you move your mouse just to the right where you can see the IP address of nodes there? Yeah, just up, no, right up there, up. So you can see there's an IP address. So you could get there simply by typing that IP address into your browser, just like you would with any other IP system. Or you can type the symbolic name, which if you can see over on the left, you can see people's call signs and their various designations. So any application that works on a computer, I'm sorry, what I'm trying to say here is you could be using your computer on the internet at the same time as you're connected to the mesh. But you have to be a little bit careful not to send internet traffic over the mesh. And it's sometimes if you browse to somewhere, like you browse to the internet to get some information, you may end up doing it over the mesh. So you got to be a little bit careful. And there's a special type of router that I'll talk about that allows you to, if you like, firewall your mesh, so you don't end up inadvertently sending internet traffic over the mesh. There's 2 reasons why you don't do it. Firstly, because it's illegal, because under Part 7 you can't carry internet traffic over ham radio, and we can debate that, but that's an interesting discussion. But the second thing is, if you try to access the internet over the mesh, you may not get very fast service. You may get incredibly slow response because you're going through some guy who inadvertently has opened up a port onto the internet. How are we doing for time, Barry?
Yeah, good. Keep going. I think we get about another.
Yeah,
yeah, good. You're good.
Yeah, I'm on slide 7, so I think we're in good shape. Okay, next slide, please. So this is what's going on in Marin, and I live in Mill Valley, which is we recently connected into the mesh from Mill Valley, going through both Treasure Island and through the VA. So can you know Treasure Island there, Barry? Can you run your mouse over that? Treasure Island in the middle of the bay, yeah. So Treasure Island, there's a guy there at sea level on Treasure Island who ended up being sort of a key of the mesh, which is ironical, but it's simply because of his location, even though he's still. So I'm connected to him, but I'm also connected down to the VA hospital in the western part of San Francisco. That's the mesh as is in San Francisco at the moment. And let's go to the next slide, please. So what I've been doing up here in the Tahoe region is try to find sites. And I went a mountain bike up to Relay Peak at Memorial Weekend. Well, I didn't go all the way to Relay Peak because there was too much snow, but I carried a one of these TP-Link nodes up and a power feed in a battery power feed bag, and zip tied it to the chain link fence around the site. And I think, John, you've probably already been up there and removed it. Is that right?
No, I didn't. I have not been up there yet. We're supposed to go up next week, but the road is open now.
Okay. Yeah, well, it certainly wasn't. I got my bike about halfway up and then I had to walk the rest of the way, but that's life. But
Yeah,
what
when we
this
go
is,
up there
this is
next week, I'll grab it and get it ready and, get it back to you.
Oh, no, you don't need to. I'm going to go up there maybe even tomorrow and do some more testing from there. But I'd like to talk to you, John, sometime about how we can perhaps do something legal rather than guerrilla mode. So I apologize for the guerrilla activities, but when you're doing testing, you're just trying to work out what works rather than trying to set anything up. So this is a plot of the 5.8 gig coverage from Relay Peak. So if you look at that, the little purple thing in the middle is Relay Peak, and see the coverage down is pretty good, and it goes down into my property, which is somewhere there in Truckee. Barry, you might better move your mouse around. And it also covers down into, I think, Spanish Springs, is it? No, that's not Spanish Springs, sorry. Over to the right of I-580. There's a whole area there that covers. But the thing is that Relay Peak doesn't get into Reno. That's the main reason to show you that. So one of the things we're going to talk about in the next few slides is a way to get into Reno. And Tom, WA9ETO, and I have been brainstorming over ways we can do this. Next slide, please, Barry. So here's an example of the path from Tahoe to Relay Peak. So this is using the Ubiquity program called UI.com. And so I've done a plot here from Bogdan's site up on the top of Tahoe. Some of you may know Bogdan, K6BIB. He's got a pretty impressive repeater up here on Tahoe that's working on DMR and various other capabilities. And this is a test I did from near Bogdan's house. You can see the dish there in amongst the Manzanita, and you can see Relay Peak in the distance. Just there's the dish, and then the Relay Peak in the background. It's actually slightly hidden by that tree, Barry. So that's anyway. And what you see down the bottom is a profile, and when you put in the product that you're using, in this case it was a PowerBeam 5, and put in the Latin long, it does the calculation based on a terrain map that's like a topographic map, and it gives you an estimate of what the capacity is likely to be. So in this case it says 66 megabits. So that's the theoretical capacity that's available for that link, given the parameters of the path and given the equipment that we have at each end. So Bogdan is going to stick a node up on his property. We're just debating whether it's going to be a sector node or a omni-mode node, but the idea is from Bogdan to Relay Peak would be, if you like, the main route to get into Reno from Truckee. And then I will just have a local link here in Tahoe to get from my place to Bogdan, because I don't have really good access to very good visibility of Relay Peak from our house. Any questions about this? This is a pretty important slide. Anyone got any questions or comments?
Let me open up the system. If hang on a sec, I gotta find that. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, go ahead and give your call sign.
KCBIB.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Bogdan, you're with us.
I'm with you. Yes, thank you. I had actually one question about the testing in the trees. How sensitive is to the forest, so to speak?
Very. As I was mentioning about 10 minutes ago, I was doing some testing in Marin last before I came up here, and I wasn't getting great great path parameters, so I moved just slightly to avoid some foliage, and it wasn't anything that I would have thought would be important. It wasn't even green because of the drought, but that made the difference. Just moving just 2 feet to the right changed from marginal to full connection capability. So we're going to have to address that, Bogdan, when we put your node up. We're going to have to make sure we're totally clear of any foliage.
Cool, thank you.
And
Thanks,
7ROJ.
Yes, hi.
Hi there. Yeah, I'd be glad to talk to you offline about this stuff. But the one thing that I'll mention, and people, fortunately, amateurs are a lot easier to get than Wi-Fi customers to understand this. But pine needles, depending on the kind of tree, are at multiples of 800 megahertz or multiples of 900 megahertz. And if you do a little math, that falls right in the middle of a lot of Wi-Fi bands. And because like you said, because of the drought, I can confirm that we have a lot of evergreens that are out there happily attenuating RF signals on your interested bands.
Well, thank you, John. That's very apropos, because I've had a lot of trouble, as I said, our house here at Tahoe down, while we can actually see Relay Peak, I can't get a clear path that's free of the foliage. And what I'm going to do later on today is I'm going to stick an Omni up the back of my house with about 100 feet of J45, of 6 to actually do some testing, because the plan is I'll put the Omni up at the back of my house connected to the tunnel, and I'm going to talk about the tunnel in a minute. And then when I go up on my bike to Relay Peak to retrieve my my lonely node, I'll be able to test back down to Donna and see if I've got successful connections. Any other questions before we move on? Well, thank you, John. I was hoping you'd chime in. Thank you. Next slide, Barry. So this is something. There's a gentleman whose name is Jim, and I've forgotten his call sign. I was referred to him by somebody else because he has access to Raw Peak. Jim, are you on the call today? I'm sorry, I can't remember your call sign.
I think this is the Jim that is the president of the Sierra Club, and he came out of Southern California. I ran into him when we were down doing a bunch of stuff in Carson about a month ago or 3 weeks ago for the Pony Express rewrite. I don't remember his call.
So I sent him an email. He responded, but and I said, well, look, I'm going to do some testing over July 4. So what I'd like to do, if Jim can get up onto Raw Peak, is that how it's pronounced? I don't know. And I can ride my bike up onto the Diamond Peak Ski Resort, and from there you've got a wonderful view down into the Carson Valley, as I'm sure you guys know. And if you look at the profile down the bottom, it's a really great profile. It's totally unobstructed. So 36 kilometers. So that would be an interesting test to do. I'm pretty sure we can do that distance, but I haven't done that far yet. The furthest I've gone so far is 32K. Okay, next slide, please. So Ward Peak, the reason I mentioned Ward Peak, not everyone's familiar with Ward Peak, but for historical reasons, our Marin organization has access to a repeater site on Ward Peak. And I don't want to go to the background to that, but Ward Peak is a possible way that we can get a Part 15 microwave connection to the San Francisco Bay Area. And Tom and I have been discussing this, with a big dish up there at each end, we can probably do some Part 15 unlicensed connection to link the mesh into San Francisco. And I'll talk about why that's a good idea in a couple more slides. And the issue with Relay Peak, obviously, I'm glad you're on here. We would really like to get some access into Relay Peak that's consistent with the operations of the site. Obviously, we don't want to screw up what's going on there, but just getting AC is all we really need, and we can stand up some weatherproof nodes that will really not get anybody's way. So we'll talk offline about that. Next slide.
Yeah, because I'm up there as a customer of Dave Metz, and he has some pretty, he's got some pretty strict requirements about unlicensed wireless, but he's also a ham, so we might be able to approach him about it and see what he says.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate your help. That's great. So here's another opportunity, and why Relay Peak is useful. We're just brainstorming about how to get into Reno, and we could go from Relay Peak to Virginia City Highlands if we can find a suitable place there, and then from that place we could get back into the northwest from the node on the right into Reno. And Tom, WA9ETO, has offered to stand up a node in West Reno where he's located. Tom, can you, if you're on the call, can you just briefly explain your location? Maybe Tom didn't make it.
No, I found the unmute button. Am I on?
Can you get a
Yes,
little
you're on.
closer to your mic? You're a little soft.
Okay.
There we go.
Right. I'm in Northwest Reno, just off of McCarran at 80, and a relatively good view into probably the central Reno area.
And Tom has a lot of experience with 15. He's got, what's that longest link you've got, Tom? What frequency is it at?
It's a 5.8. It's a Ubiquity 2-foot dish, couple 28 mile links to my cabin in the Virginia City Highlands.
So we can talk about doing a hybrid of part 97, and that'll come out when we talk in a couple of slides about tunnels. Thanks, Tom, for coming on. Next slide, please. So the mesh redundancy allows self-healing. So when one node goes down, as long as you've got an alternate node, it will automatically run and heal itself to recreate the path. And I'm not going to run the animation because it screws up every time I run it. Next slide, please. So internet tunnels. So internet tunnels allow islands to be joined together to become one logical mesh. So for example, the tunnel that I ran up here to Truckee is allowing us to build a mesh that in Truckee that looks like it's part of the San Francisco mesh, even though it's separated by 160 or so miles. And the mesh islands are great in the sense that they allow you to build out the network where there's no RF connection. However, this defies the whole point of the emergency mesh because you're still dependent on the internet. So for that reason, the long-term attitude here would be to replace tunnels with dedicated Part 15 links, such as the ones Tom's talked about. And I think we can do the 200 miles or whatever it is to the San Francisco Bay Area with a decent, maybe a 4-foot dish at 5.8 gigs, or maybe even at lower frequencies. The interesting thing is that getting the height is 90% of the issue, and going in from Ward Peak may be the way to do that, because the connection we had with Ward Peak, we already had a UHF link that was working to the San Francisco Bay Area direct from Ward Peak. So the path is good at UHF. Doesn't mean it's going to be good at 5.8, but it's pretty good chance we'll be able to do that. And we have the site obviously at Ward Peak and the site in the Bay Area. So the AREDN tunnel configuration, you have a tunnel server and you have a tunnel client. So I'm the tunnel client on the right, the green, and we're connected through the internet to a firewall router and a server in San Francisco. And if you go to the next slide, please. You can see there's all the big red arrow going from San Francisco up to Truckee. And at my end here in my house here in Truckee, we have, you can see the Nighthawk router at the bottom. And then on top of that is a thing called a HAP. And this is the router I was telling you about. It's a dual concurrent access point router that allows you to run the internet and AREDN side by side without interconnection. It's a very cool device, costs about $45. And once you flash that, and you have to flash it with the AREDN software, it then has an IP address. So that 10.43 blah, blah, blah IP address is the HAP's personality on the network, and anyone on the network can go and connect to that HAP as long as they've got connectivity. The HAP is powered by a wall, which you cannot see. The WAN connection comes in on the yellow Ethernet cable onto the left-hand side, and then the right-hand side, where the gray Ethernet cable is coming out, has actually got power feed provided by the HAP. So I spoke earlier about how you need to get power over Ethernet. Then the HAP provides that power over Ethernet simply by it being connected to the wall wart, which is on the left of the front panel there. And then on the right is a Ubiquiti rocket, and I've just got a couple of dipoles, a couple of dBi dipoles attached to it. So that's the basic setup for a tunnel termination here in Truckee. Anyone got any questions on that? Because this is pretty interesting, I feel.
Rob, this is Barry. I have just a question.
Yeah.
I want to go back to this last page. So earlier you said you can't go through you can't do internet traffic, but this isn't internet traffic. This is the internet cloud doing the tunnel. You want to just describe the tunnel versus internet traffic? I think there's a distinction.
Well, it's a dedicated path through the internet that's been, if you like, nailed up. It's a term we used to use in telecom. It's a nailed up connection that is dedicated to going between the client and the server, and of course it runs over the internet, which is its weakness, the fact that it runs over the internet. Its strength is it runs over the internet, so it's ubiquitous. So if I have internet service here in Truckee, then I can connect a tunnel. It's not an optimum solution, but it gets us through not having direct RF connection. I'm not sure if that helps, does it, Barry?
I think you said it's the antidote to non-RF direct connection.
Right, right. And ideally we'd have an RF connection, but it that's not practical at the moment until we can sort out a number of other issues. So any further questions on the tunnel before we move on? Okay, we've only 4 slides to go, so I think we're okay for time. So what can you do with the mesh? So obviously any client server or peer-to-peer application that runs over TCP/IP will run over the mesh. It's just TCP/IP. So every node on the mesh has an IP address, which is global. So as long as you connect the mesh and you go to your device or your server with a 10.xxx, you're in business. So you can do such things as mesh chat, and mesh chat is what we would use for our public service events. We would use mesh chat to basically do keyboard to keyboard communication between nodes that are serving rest stops, public service events like the Great and various other events that you run up here. You can run IP phone, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. Video conferencing. One of the big early applications was remote streaming of public service events. In other words, running a camera at the start line of the finish so that families and people, observers watching what's going on, could see their families finishing the race or along the race to see how they got through the most difficult parts. This morning, as we're waiting to start to kick me off, I was watching the end of the Tour de France in the mountains of Savoie in France, and it is dumping down rain, and all these guys riding their bikes downhill at great speed. That's the kind of thing that is provided by the television channels for a major sporting event like the Tour de France, and we can do our own version of that in our for our served agencies in public service. Repeater linking is another obvious application, because obviously a lot of repeaters are being linked part 15 microwave, just 430 megahertz point-to-point links. WinLink is an interesting situation, and there's a lot going on in Marin at the moment on WinLink, where we're trying to work out a way to make WinLink scalable. We ran a drill 2 weeks ago in which our WinLink system basically crawled to a halt because the packet access was just totally overloaded. We were not able to successfully send traffic for about over a 45-minute drill bit because of the collisions that were occurring in the packet network that serves WinLink. There was a post office function, which I haven't, but one of our people in Marin has, where traffic can be posted to the post office on the mesh, and then that becomes exactly what it sounds like, the place where you go to pick up your mail. So you could basically use the post office to receive WinLink traffic and retrieve it. The main thing about using the mesh here is it's scalable, and as those of you who know, if you throw more traffic at the internet, all that happens if you've got more traffic is it may slow down, but your traffic will still get through. So with WinLink at the moment using regular AFSK packet, the collision situation is such that your traffic may get through. There's a lot of remote sensors and cameras, air quality monitors. Once you get on the mesh, you can open up a camera on Grizzly Peak in the Bay Area and so on, air quality and so on. But two basic issues here: it cannot be encrypted and it cannot be commercial. So you can't provide a camera service to someone who wants to watch over their car yard or anything like that using the mesh. Next slide, Barry, please. So here's an example of using an IP phone. So this is just a junkyard Cisco phone that I got for 30 bucks. It runs off 5 volts, so you just, there's a wall wart that powers it up at 5 volts, connects through Ethernet to a PoE injector, and then from there to the dish. So 24 volts required for the PoE injector, and then you can just basically connect their phone directly to the dish. It's very visceral to when people see that, when they see a dish connected directly to a phone and have a conversation over that. And the mesh in San Francisco hosts a server that allows SIP IP phones to connect, and we have 4-digit phone numbers and we can call each other up. This is really quite useful for a public service event, because particularly when you're trying to help third parties pass traffic, a lot of third parties like bicycle organizers and everything aren't very comfortable with the half duplex nature of push to talk radio. So having a full duplex phone is more attractive in a lot of ways. Stop to have an IP phone where you're connected to the start, finish, and all the other places is a great way to manage a public service event. And we're going to experiment with that over this next summer public service season, which we actually are having. Believe it or not, we're actually got public service events starting next month. So the phone has 2 RJ45 ports. One goes to the node, the other goes to a computer. So you don't have to have the computer, but if you do, you can have the computer doing mesh traffic and the phone doing voice traffic. Next slide, Barry. 2 more slides. So call to action. At the moment, I'm engaged in testing potential sites. I've already spoken about hoping to get up to Relay Peak, maybe tomorrow, to A, retrieve my Gorilla node, and B, do some testing back down here to Tahoe Dana. The issue with sites is that existing sites aren't always the best. Obviously, getting access, getting permission is important, but a lot of the VHF, UHF repeater sites for LMR and other services are very noisy, and 5.8 gig isn't immune from noise interference. A lot of it can be in band just from WISPs and other services, but you know, these are consumer radios. They're not perfect, and they may be subject to intermod and various other issues. The point is, a mesh site doesn't have to be like a typical NMR site. All you need is a wall wart and the node, or a battery and a node. And the node automatically meshes everyone it sees. So to give you an example, the node that I put up on Relay Peak at Memorial Weekend could mesh everyone it sees. It could be one person, or it could be 10 people, would mesh them all and automatically act as a repeater without any configuration. It's incredibly cool. So what that means is that mesh site can be something that wouldn't traditionally be a repeater. It could be the side of a fire station, or I'm thinking of the ski lift at the top of Diamond Peak, the building at the top of Diamond Peak that sees down into the Carson Valley. We could just talk nicely to the ski outfit and ask them if we can just plug in the wall wart into their power and stick a node on the side of the building.
Just so you know, the building that you're referring to is called Bull Wheel.
All right, thank you, Bull Wheel. Yes, I've been up there and shivered a lot in a very windy site. And friends and relations in high places. So, you know, how about your uncle or your parents or whatever, people that aren't hams? If they've got a nice site that can see the areas you're trying to serve, we can throw a node in there, even if it isn't very effective. If it only serves one person, it's still a node on the network. And as the mesh develops, then we can make different, you build the mesh out from that. A solar powered nodes are very practical. The typical node draws about 12 watts. So if you do the back of the envelope math, it's 288 watt hours on 24 hours, and a 100-watt solar panel would probably be fine, and a 24 amp hour battery. Now you've got issues with vandalism and all that encapsulation, so it's a bit more substantial than just screwing a node on the side of your parents' house. What we have to do to decide now is decide whether we want to go ahead with one integrated mesh for Tahoe and Reno-Carson, or we run separately. And Tom, WA90TO, is offered to stand up a tunnel node at his place, and we'll set up a tunnel between Tom and San Francisco, or maybe between Tom and me here in Truckee. I'm not sure which way we'd do that. And that would be a temporary measure before we could put in some kind of long distance microwave connection. So it's up to you guys, depending on how much interest there is in SNARS and the rest of the Tahoe and Reno-Carson community, as to whether we want to go with separate or combined. From a point of view of operation, it's not material, because what you have the areas linked, they function as one logical network. So it's not like it's going to restrict you from communicating between Truckee and Reno, but it's just to do with the infrastructure, how we build things. So the call to action here is, if you've got a site, if you've got friends and family that have a site that you think might work, let's talk. I'm up here on probably once or twice a month. I'm happy to do lots of testing, and please contact me. My email is at the start of the presentation, and these slides are available. I set a copy of the slides in the chat, so you can go to the Google Slides and download them. Some references for you. This month's QST has an article on using AREDN at a marathon for the Marine Corps. So grab your QST and check in. It's not really a technical article, it's more of a functional article as to how the mesh worked for them. There's an earlier QST article that was put out by the guy who originated the AREDN. It was, I think, about 4 years old, but it's still material to where we are now. The AREDN website, ardenmesh.org, is very, very complete. Fantastic tutorials, all the information about how to flash. The San Francisco mesh has their own website which describes what they're doing. And interestingly, they made a request to the Amateur Radio Development Network, I think I've got that right, AREDN, for financing, and they got 100 grand from this organization that I didn't even know existed. Where did the money come from? Because they sold off some IP addresses. There were some IP addresses that were reserved for ham radio that ham radio didn't need. Somebody, I guess this amateur radio development organization decided to sell them off. We got some money, and that's now being used to build out the mesh. So for instance, I can access that. Some of the equipment, like this node that I have here in my hand, it's probably worth about $200. I was able to pick this up from the equipment cache they have in San Francisco. And then the rest of the reference list there is just the various manufacturers and the radio mobile profiling software. So that's my presentation. I hope I didn't take too long. Over to you, Barry.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's do a couple of things. Let's open it up for just a couple of minutes of questions. Then we'll stop the recording. Then we'll open it up for the regular Q&A. I just want to thank you. Fascinating. I've known Rob for a number of years out of Truckee, and he gave me a little presentation on this, and he did one for our group, and I said, this could be really cool. And then he got connected with Tom, ETO, and also the gentleman, Jim, down in South. So let's see if there's any specific questions for Rob around AREDN. Just open up your mic and give your call sign.
AE5CA.
Yeah, go ahead, Clint.
Just as a point of reference, when I lived in Waco back in the 2010, 2013 time period, I did a lot of work with the predecessor to AREDN. I worked with the folks who formed AREDN early on. They were part of the broadband Hamnet group that I was with. And so I've got a lot of experience with using some of this gear. And I had tunnel networks. I've had all kinds of stuff set up at my house. We had a pretty good network set up in Waco at one time running broadband Hamnet. The problem we found was anything over about 3 hops, the latency in the network was a limiting factor. Has anything changed since about 2015 that improves that capability? Because what I saw was if I had to go 3 hops to get anywhere, I couldn't make a reliable connection.
Thanks, Clint. That's so wonderful that you've got all that background, and I hope we can work together on this. Are you interested in working on this?
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. It's interesting. A lot of people like yourself have been involved elsewhere, and life's demands obviously take you elsewhere. So that's understandable. I'm retired.
I was actually part of the beta test team when they brought the first Ubiquity gear online, porting the software from the WRT54s to
Sure.
Ubiquity. Andre Hansen, Conrad, Laura, that group was part of the team that did the porting, and I know those gentlemen well. A lot of weird things happened about that time period when AREDN formed, but my experience was the big wide open networks didn't work so well. The best use of something like this was like at a field day site, a fairly limited area where you could get by on a few hops.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and certainly the Bay Area mesh is a good example of that. If I don't take care where I connect into the network, I may only get half a meg. I might get 300 kilobits or 500, but 300 kilobits is a lot more than I can get with packet.
Yeah, but
so it's
you're
a
not
matter
going
of
to
scale.
run an effective video signal.
I know. Yeah.
And
yeah.
unless you've got a good clean link, you're not even going to do a good VoIP signal.
You're absolutely right, and the whole issue here is in design, and obviously making sure the network's designed to have good performance metrics on the individual links, and also make sure that the meshing where the links are joined together are properly managed with managed switches, and rather than just tying everything together and ending up with collisions occurring there. Obviously, we're off to a better start because you've got a faster, intrinsically faster network. Most of the links are intrinsically 66 megs, say. So if you've got a link that's intrinsically 66 megs, then your congestion isn't occurring in the link, it's occurring at the point where the links are joined together.
Yeah, but
and that's where the issues are today.
but every node that you go through, you lose a factor of 2 in your network speed. So if I could talk directly to your node, I would get the 66 meg. But if I have to go through a node in the middle, I'm going to get 33, and it just keeps dropping down from there.
I understand, but we're still better off than we are with packet. That's the way I look at it, Clint.
That's probably correct.
Yes.
I'm just questioning how you think. It's probably a better discussion to have offline, but how do you think we can get enough hops between, say, here in Reno and the Bay Area to actually have a viable connection? Because I don't see it using mesh. I see it maybe using some Part 15 equipment and doing I'm going to call it a mesh of meshes.
Well, that's effectively what we have. We have islands that are connected with tunnels, and the example I have here in our house in Truckee is an internet tunnel which is delivering around I think it was 15 megabits I measured yesterday back into the Bay Area. Now, as we move into more nodes in Reno, so on, it may go down to 7.5 megabits. It may go down by another quarter down to 3.75 megabits. But think where we're coming from, Clint. We're coming from a situation with packet at the 1200 bits per second on VHF. If you try to serve agencies and public service events with packet, good luck.
Correct, but in most cases, I'm using this at a local event where I can do point-to-point links, which gives me some good speed, and that's where this stuff excels. It's not in the wide area networks.
Okay, well, we should debate this further. The point is the mesh has been developed to the point it is today. It's not perfect. In terms of having it publicly open to all Part 97 use without network configurations is both its strength and its weakness. I think you'd agree with that. And so the strength is that anyone can access it. The weakness is that you can end up with paths that are unusable. And this is why we need people like you to basically help us build the system in a way that is usable to all our clients.
Great conversations. Let's hear what I think we're going to do. Let's open up for one more AREDN question. Then we'll stop the recording. Then we'll go to the next section, which is open for anything. Could be AREDN or anything else about stars. Thank you, Clint. Any other? Oh, someone's speaking and it came through weird.
K6 baby.
Hold on, Bogdan. George, you're talking. Hold on a second. Hey, George, you're talking, but it's all digitally broke up, so we're not hearing you. George, we're
I think you can.
George, we're hearing you, but it's all high-speed garbage.
Yeah,
so
he's muted now. Yeah, he's muted now. So Bogdan.
Bogdan, do you have one closing comment? Go ahead.
Actually, a question. So let's assume I'm, mountain biking somewhere. Is there a way, to be mobile and tie into the mesh network and make use of it anyway?
That's a great question. If you've ever met Greg in San Francisco, Greg Albrecht, but he has a little portable mesh node that he carries around. He doesn't carry it mountain biking, but it's on a tripod, and he actually was showing it off at Field Day last weekend. And it's basically a rocket with a couple of 6 dBi dipoles sticking out the top, and he's just accessing that with a portable computer. But mountain biking, it's a little bit more challenging. The other thing that Greg is doing, his car, the roof of his car is more populated than a Waymo self-driving vehicle. So if you look at his car, he's got a mesh node on the top, solar powered, and he's got an air quality monitor and everything. He drives around doing all this kind of stuff. So I think mountain bike's a bit of a push, but certainly pedestrian, mobile at events like a Field Day, and also being able to go drive around the city is a great idea. Thanks,
I think the point that you're making is that you still need an equipment. It's not like, opening up your phone Wi-Fi, searching for the mesh, connect to the mesh in a private network, and use some apps on the phone.
Right.
The big limiting factor is a line of sight between two stations. And the nice thing with mesh is if you've got multiple stations, I'm going to use the term located on high geographic towers that you may see, as long as you can make a connection between one of those, then you're able to connect in through. But any trees, any dirt, anything that blocks your path, you're not going to have a connection. But it's somewhat feasible to be able to set up a node in a very obscure place very fast, as long as you have clean line of sight between the two locations.
And that's exactly what we're doing in Flint. We're building solar powered nodes that we can drop onto ridge tops for a public event.
Yeah,
So basically, this is
I had
a system.
solar powered node on top of a hospital in Waco. In fact, it's still there. We actually ran 4 separate mesh nodes, and we had 200-watt solar panels that powered it, and it worked great for 7 years, 8 years now.
Thanks. We have one closing question from George. I don't think we could hear him, but he put on the chat, are there any legal restrictions on AREDN traffic? And I'm assuming that is answered by the ham radio piece there, Rob.
Yeah, so it's the same as Part 90. It's Part 97. So it's the same as what you did on field day. If you get your granddaughter on, you have to say third-party traffic follows. And the equivalent has to be managed on AREDN as well.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's end this part of the recording for the Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network. And Rob's email address is rrollins. I can't see it on the screen.
No, Rollins 47. Rollins 47. Rollins 47 at Gmail. But I'm good on QRZ as well.
And it's November Zulu 6 Juliet. Thank you so much, Rob, and everybody. Great conversation today. I'm going to end the recording for now, and then we'll continue.